Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today on live stream straight from Westminster. My name is Laura Dehennin and I'm the Chief Exec at Hope for the Future, and we're the UK's only charity dedicated to bridging the gap between communities and their elected representatives. We do so through training and resources and really breaking down the political system and demystifying politics so people feel able, confident and empowered to speak with their politicians about the climate and nature crisis. Just before we get into the conversation today, I've got a little bit of housekeeping. We are live streaming today straight from London, so please bear with us on the tech. I really hope that all works out fine and you can hear us through the whole thing, but if there are any issues, today is being recorded and it will be uploaded fully subtitled to our YouTube in the next few days, so look out for that in case you miss any little bits today. You are very welcome to start asking questions for Nadia into the chat today. One of my colleagues is here monitoring those questions, and we'll have a 10 to 15 minute slot later in today's event for you to ask those questions directly to Nadia. So please do be thinking of what they are and start putting those into the chat when you're ready. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today with Nadia Whittome MP, Labour for Nottingham East, and Nadia's really kindly invited us here into her office, so thank you so much, Nadia, to speak together really about the power of ordinary voices in raising climate and nature up the political agenda, and we're really excited to get your perspective on that today, so thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for coming and welcome everyone to my office.
Thank you. So Nadia is now in her second term and is still one of the youngest MPs in Parliament. I will leave Nadia to introduce herself properly in just a second, but just to talk a little bit about why we're here today and how this session has come together. At Hope for the Future, we see firsthand, day in, day out, the power that community stories, personal perspectives and lived experience has when speaking with politicians about climate issues. And there's so much more to do as we edge closer to our 2030 climate commitments, that we really feel at Hope for the Future that there's, real importance, and now is the time to speak to your politicians about these issues. And we know that still only 10 to 15% of people speak to their politicians every year, and that's about every issue, not just climate change. So there's a lot of people not engaging in democracy, and we would really like, to be a support tool for people to do so. And hearing your perspective about, how constituents can reach out to their MP, what's really valuable, what you feel is most engaging when speaking to those constituents will be really, really important to hear about today. So thank you, Nadia. And without further ado, I would love you to sort of take the spotlight and talk about yourself, why you got into politics, and introduce you to the audience.
Amazing. Okay. It would be great to talk about those things. And I think the work that you do, empowering people to engage with their elected representatives, is really important. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Hi everyone, I'm Nadia Whittome. I'm the Labour MP for Nottingham East. So I was first elected in 2019, and at that time I was the youngest MP in the country. The name they give you is baby of the house, which is kind of, it's a bit weird and infantilizing. I was 23 at the time, and I've now been an MP for almost 5 years. Mm-hmm. So I first got active in politics when I was 16. It was back in 2013. We'd had, at that point, 3 years of a Tory-led coalition government. We'd already seen lots of cuts to our public services, to our communities, to benefits, to education. So things like the educational maintenance allowance was cut, tuition fees were increased, NHS waiting lists, especially like mental health waiting lists, were getting longer and longer. And for me, it was when the bedroom tax was introduced, which was the policy that meant that if you lived in a council home and you had a spare bedroom, that you would have to pay a tax on that. And I thought that was just so incredibly cruel. It impacted lots of people in my community. So I got involved in the fight back against that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that with us today. And we've talked a little bit already about how this is now your second term. You've been re-elected, so congratulations.
Thanks.
And can you tell us a little bit about how it's been these past few months being back to Parliament, but you know, in a different environment. You're now in the governing party. How's that felt?
Yeah, it's definitely felt very different. I think for the last 5 years, everything has felt pretty hopeless, and I think that's been true inside Parliament as well as outside. And under the Conservatives, it's felt like the possibility of winning change has been very, very small. Whereas now, under a Labour government, and it's not that everything is perfect, there are things that I would like us to be doing differently, or that I would like us to be going further on. But I think it's definitely the case that there are opportunities that have opened up now that didn't exist before. We no longer have a government that is using net zero as a culture war issue, that is rolling back on climate policies. We have a Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero in Ed Miliband, who is incredibly passionate about his brief. And now it's about taking those policies further, moving towards net zero even faster, and making sure that we do that at the same time as combating the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, an MP told me quite recently that there feels a different energy about Parliament as well. You know, we've got so many new MPs and first time ever being elected. Do you sense that as well, like walking through the corridors?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like there are loads of colleagues whose names I don't know, or I don't recognise their faces, and I'm like, are you a Labour MP or a Tory MP? But it's like usually a Labour MP because we've got all the new MPs.
Yeah, and do you think, so just from, you know, thinking about the constituent perspective, and you've been there as a new MP, what is that feeling of being a new MP like, and how can we expect our new MPs to be feeling coming into Parliament for the first time?
It is really daunting, and I think probably even more so when you're going straight into government, or you're in the party that is in government. It was like very kind of like it was gutting to be elected on the back of such a huge election defeat, and to know what that would mean for our constituents and our communities in the years ahead. But we didn't have, I guess, the same pressure of going straight into government. I think MPs will still be kind of setting up their offices. That takes a very long time, and might be feeling a bit turned around. But I'm sure that they would want to hear from constituents about a whole range of issues, including climate crisis.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'm sorry, by the way, I think my tummy's rumbling. It's really
Mine
embarrassing.
is too,
I forgot to have breakfast this morning.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for making time for this.
No, that's okay.
Hopefully you can grab something to eat after this.
It's my disorganisation. There was time to get breakfast, I just forgot.
Well, that's hinting at the busy schedule of an MP. That was something we should all be mindful of when speaking with them. Well, thank you. And you talked there about sort of getting stuff done, and now it's a time to get stuff done and starting to see progress. And what do you think the value of hearing from constituents about the issue of climate and nature, for example, is in that process of getting stuff done and understanding what to prioritise first as an incoming government?
It's really important. I think for me it kind of sharpens my focus, and especially if there are like lots of the same issue that is being raised by constituents, then I think, okay, I need to make sure that I prioritise this, whether that's asking questions of the government or signing motions, writing articles, speaking about it in the chamber, which is the House of Commons, like sometimes we call it the chamber. And I think as well, like having personal stories and anecdotes means that I can use those when I'm speaking to ministers, or when I'm like writing a speech and speaking in the House of Commons. So that's really useful to hear about how the climate crisis is impacting people's everyday lives.
And how often would you say that you hear from constituents about the climate crisis, for example?
All the time, like really regularly. I think before I became an MP, I was expecting to hear about it a lot, and it was always a big priority issue for me. But yeah, even I couldn't predict quite how often I would hear from people about it. And actually, what's interesting is the diverse range of people I hear from, because I think there's, and it's a myth really, that the only people who care about the climate crisis are young or middle class and white, and that's just not the case. And that's not surprising really, given that the climate crisis, both here in the global north and in the global south, disproportionately impacts working class people and like globally people of colour. So I hear from people of all sorts of ages, backgrounds, from like right across the constituency.
That's really good to know. And that's something we often hear from politicians, is that, you know, if we do see that diversity, you know, a young person at school age and an older person, and then we've got, you know, people in work from parent age as well. And if you are hearing from that cross section of society, it strengthens the case.
Yeah,
do you think
definitely.
that definitely adds some value to the conversation if you can show different perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often hear from older people with grandchildren who say that they're really worried about their future, or that it's something that their grandkids really care about and have been learning about at school and have then come home and spoken to the rest of the family about. So yeah, I think that's really valuable.
Brilliant. And do you think, you say you hear about it a lot, does it come in different forms? You know, because climate change is such a transcending issue, right? And, you know, issues like fuel poverty or transport issues, they all fall really under the umbrella of climate issues in some way, shape or form. So when you say you hear about climate change, are you hearing it in different ways?
Definitely. I think as exactly as you said, the thing about the climate crisis is that it intersects across like every single policy area. Like, it's about health inequality, because if you live in a polluted place and you're breathing in dirty air, then you're going to have medical and health issues, and you're going to have a lower life expectancy. It's an education issue, because children are learning in buildings that are falling apart and aren't retrofitted, and equally teachers and teaching staff are teaching in those buildings. As you say, it's a transport issue. It's an issue of the economy and what we're investing in. It's a housing issue, because people, and I think we see it especially during the winter months, people freezing in their homes, when if those homes were properly retrofitted and insulated, then that would both cut their energy bills and also cut carbon emissions. And I think that just proves, or all of those things prove, that the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis really are two sides of the same coin.
And you think for your constituents who you hear from, the everyday constituent is able to make those connections themselves between, you know, the paying for food or paying for heating and the link with climate change? Do you see people making that connection naturally themselves?
I see a lot of people doing that. And again, I think that's not surprising, because they're living it in their everyday lives. So they, better than anyone, can explicitly see those connections. Sometimes, very occasionally, I do get people contacting me saying that that they're worried about the cost of net zero, and or that they think that this money should be spent tackling the cost of living crisis. It's very rare that I get those emails, and in those circumstances I would write back saying that how these issues are interconnected, and that we're the solutions to the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis are often the same, like retrofitting homes, for example, and that doesn't just help the climate, but also helps people's pockets and cuts bills. And then often people will be persuaded, or will just kind of, I'll say that I think differently to you on that.
Thank you, yeah. And so when people are contacting you about these issues, any issue, but today we're talking about climate and nature issues, what gets yours noticed? So I can only imagine you receive a lot of pieces of correspondence every day. So if you really want to get, yours to the top of the pile, is there anything you could advise people to do, to say, to put in their lived experience or share something particularly emotive?
Yeah, I think so. I have a really amazing team who, they do all sorts, but one of the things that they do is help deal with casework and responding to constituents by email. And I would say that MPs' offices are incredibly busy. So we get all sorts of different issues, ranging from like important but less urgent to like very urgent and time sensitive. So things like people being evicted, people being threatened with deportation by the Home Office, having their benefits cut, and those are things that we need to deal with immediately. So it won't always be that people receive an immediate reply. That's not to say that this isn't important. It's literally the most important issue that we face in our generation. But yeah, we often get like very time sensitive cases that have to be dealt with. So I would say, like, thank you for being patient. If you make sure that you include in the subject heading what it's about, say quite succinctly and clearly what the issue is, why it's important to you, what you want the MP to do about it. And the same goes for if you're requesting a surgery appointment, to talk about it. If you can kind of, stick to that structure, I think that's really useful.
Yeah. And do you think, hearing from people's personal perspectives and those stories from, how these things are affecting people's lives gives you, for example, you stand in the chamber, in the Houses of Commons, and I can imagine that's a very daunting thing, and to stand up in front of quite a lot of people, especially thinking about all these new MPs coming into Parliament as well, and having that backing of this is what my constituents have said, this is lived experience. Do you think there's power in that?
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. It kind of reassures you when you're standing there that you're speaking on behalf of your constituents and you're speaking for their interests. And that is the job of an MP, is to be amplifying the voices of our communities and calling for the solutions that they are calling for. So if you speak about how this is impacting you, whether it's like the increase in food prices and how that is connected to climate breakdown, or about like breathing and respiration problems and the impact of that, then that empowers us.
Yeah, that's really good to know, thank you. And during your time in Parliament, do you think the salience of climate change, the nature crisis as well, and also how much it's being spoken about in Parliament has changed, hopefully for the better, but do you think it's spoken about more now?
To be honest, because I was elected in December 2019 and it was after the school climate strikes, which massively pushed this up the agenda. And I think, to be honest, if it wasn't for that, then Parliament wouldn't have declared a climate and ecological emergency. But yeah, since I've been an MP, I'd say not so much, but probably if I'd been an MP for like 10, 15 years, then I'm sure I would have seen a really big increase.
What a testament to the power of everyday people there. You've just said, those school children and their teachers taking a stance and how that really, really affected what was happening in Parliament. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how that felt, being on the receiving end of it?
Yeah, it really did. And it was one of the things that kind of, like, as it was happening, I was thinking about standing to be the local MP. And I was always very clear that I wanted to, like, I'd marched with those students, and that I wanted to represent them in Parliament, and that even though a lot of them, or like the vast majority of them, would have been too young to vote, like they are still my constituents. And I think we've seen the way that the youth climate strikers have just, as I say, pushed this right up the political agenda and made it impossible for politicians to ignore. And I think we've seen that in, like, we still see climate change denial among certain politicians of a certain political persuasion. But I think even that is changing. Like, they're no longer able to say that the climate crisis isn't happening and that climate breakdown isn't real and global warming isn't real. But they say, oh, we can't move too fast on it. So I think even that shows how much people have pushed the conversation.
That's great to hear your perspective on that. Thank you so much. And just zooming forward from, we spoke about how, to get your letter or your email noticed into an MP's office, and fast forward to the point where, hopefully that person might have secured a surgery meeting with their politician. I imagine you have quite a short amount of time with each person, and that you're moving from issue to issue to issue throughout the day. You might be speaking to one person about the NHS and the next person about the climate crisis. In that meeting with that constituent or constituent group, what is really important to hear from them? And if you've only got 10-15 minutes together, how can someone make the most of that time and give you all the information you need to do something?
I think, again, it's about following a kind of structure of what the issue is, why it's really important to you, and in that you can include like your personal experiences or the experiences of other people in your community who have come and spoken to you about it, and then make sure that there is enough time to talk about the concrete asks. Especially if you're talking to an MP who already cares about this issue and has done lots of work on it. You might want to spend a little bit less time talking about why it's important and more time kind of saying, what have you done on this so far? And please, can you do these things? Whether it's like signing a letter, writing to the minister, tabling a motion, asking a question in departmental questions about it. Will you do those things? And do you have any other ideas as well? Because it's really useful for us to like be inspired by our constituents, by the people we represent, and to hear their ideas, because there might be things that we haven't thought of.
Sure. Yeah. And I imagine, actually, just as you were speaking there, that we know that you do some great work on this issue, so thank you so much. But I imagine you've got peers and colleagues in other parties as well that you speak to who don't maybe align with you on your views around this issue, but other issues. And us at Hope for the Future, we often support people to speak to their elected representatives about climate and nature crisis, and it does feel like you've got very different views on this topic. And just from your experience potentially speaking with colleagues or other stakeholders who you might be trying to influence them to do something or take your side on something, have you got any tips for people on influencing people who do have those different views to you?
I think make sure that you don't let the person you're speaking to derail the conversation by just like talking it out until you've run out of time and you haven't really been able to say what you wanted to say. So prepare in advance what it is that you want to say. I would have some kind of like mythbusters for example, when people talk about the cost of net zero, I would want to go in with some information about what the cost is of not reaching net zero, both in the future and the impact that people are already feeling. Again, in there you can talk about your personal experiences, because like MPs we're not the cleverest people in the room. We don't like have the right to be talking all the time. Like, our role is to listen, and no one can deny like your lived experience.
Yeah, and that's a really important point you've just touched on there, isn't it? Because a lot of people we speak to who, you know, like, oh, I can't speak to my MP, I don't know enough about this. What would you say to that?
Oh, it's not true. So many people say to me, like, oh, I don't feel like I know enough to talk about this issue, or even like to vote. And I think that like parts of society want to disempower us and make us feel like we don't know enough to be properly engaged. And it's not the case. Like, of course, like, nobody knows everything, and you like identify the gaps in your knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, people have a huge amount of knowledge about this, and they know what the solutions are. So please go and speak to your policymakers and put pressure on them to be doing the things that you know are necessary.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important for us all to realise, you know, that our MPs or councillors, whoever it may be, are jumping from issue to issue throughout the day, and actually have to know a little about so many different topics that usually, you know, we bringing our lived experience, or, you know, even just doing 10 minutes of research on a topic, we're probably bringing new information.
Exactly. And, you know, sometimes, like, there have been times where constituents have brought issues to me that I wasn't aware of, like the GBH pesticides. That was something that lots of local people were concerned about the council using, and kind of the impacts that it has for biodiversity, and also potentially on like human health as well. So as a result, I asked the government questions about that. I signed a motion, I've raised it locally, and that was really useful, because otherwise, you know, I might not have ever seen something about that, and now it's something that I know a little bit about, thanks to people bringing it to my attention, and have been able to do a bit of work on it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And that was actually going to be one of my next questions, was, you know, not to put you on the spot too much, but can you think of any times, maybe other than that time, where someone has brought a climate or related issue to your attention, and maybe you knew a little bit about it already, but the way they brought it to you was, you know, in an effective way, and it led you to do something on it, or change your stance on it, or anything like that?
That's the main one that jumps to mind. But I think, like, more widely, knowing that these are issues that people care about definitely motivates me to like do a lot of work on them. Yeah, and understanding, you know, we're not expecting everyone I don't know if you'd agree with me on this, but we're not expecting everyone to know the ins and outs of what you can do as well. And it's, you know, at Hope for the Future, we help people think about what their ask is, but that also, you know, your staff and you as an MP as well, you can say, you know, well, this is the issue you're bringing to me. I think I could do this for you. Is that Definitely.
Something you often do as well?
Yeah. I think that's really important, because obviously, like, we do this job every day, so like everyone knows the ins and outs of their own job, but you don't with other people's. So I think I think it's really important for MPs to say, so this is what I've done, and this has that impact. These are some of the other things that you can do. This is why I think that this way might be an effective route, and that this might not be. What do you think? Like, based on what I've said. Yeah, that's really helpful to know. And we at Hope for the Future support people to think about working with their MP as a longer term thing, and that, you know, it's not just a tick box exercise to go and meet with them and ask them to do something. And I often hear from MPs who say, you know, it's really helpful to meet with, you know, that constituent group a couple of times a year or 3 times a year, so that every few months I can update them on what I've done, and they might bring other things to the table, but it feels more like
a relationship and we're working together on something.
Yeah.
Have you got any experience of working in that way?
Yeah, definitely. I meet quite regularly with lots of the different climate groups in my constituency, and one of them volunteers, like school students and college students, from a group called Teach the Future, which is a national group but also has lots of activists locally in Nottingham. We've been working together on this climate education bill and decarbonising the education sector more widely. So that's something that we work together on. And I think it's important to not to see it as like a hierarchical relationship where like the MP has the knowledge and the power, and actually it's an equal relationship where you share knowledge and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that, closes this section really nicely. And yeah, I think hopefully what we've started to get across in this conversation is that ordinary people, the everyday person, really does have a powerful voice when it comes to influencing their politician. And would you agree with that summary there?
Absolutely. And I would say even more so when people join together in organisations and campaign groups. I think that really maximises your voice.
Especially when there's diversity amongst that group
definitely.
as well. Yeah,
definitely.
Brilliant. Well, quick time check from me. So we've got a few questions from the audience, which I'm just waiting to come through. So they'll be with me shortly. But I guess one final question from me is, we've talked about that diversity of view a little bit there already. And we invest in the climate and nature crisis as our mission here at Hope for the Future, but there are so many pressing issues facing the world, and you only have so many hours in a day as an MP. And I guess the first question is, how does that feel to try and balance all of these competing issues, but also how do you yourself prioritise them? And you've talked a little bit about time sensitivity and stuff like that, but is there anything else you can say?
I think obviously you can't do like the most work on every single issue. But if people come to me about something that they're interested in and would like me to raise, even if it's not an area that I have lots of knowledge or interest in, then I'll always raise it. I think with the climate crisis, as we've kind of touched on already, it runs through everything else.
Yes.
So I don't see those as being like competing demands. But I think there are also lots of different ways of raising different issues. Like sometimes it's like a longer article or a video that is more engaging.
Yes.
Sometimes it's asking a short, sharp question of the minister. Sometimes it's submitting written questions and you get a response and then you come back together and say, what can we do with this? Like, where do we campaign from here?
Yes, yeah. And that's really powerful from the constituent perspective, as well as thinking about different media to engage your MP with. And one thing we've been working on more recently is thinking about, people whose first language isn't English, for example, and verbal communication with an MP might seem quite, difficult or distant from them, and actually communication through artwork or theatre or short soundscapes that people can record in their own comfortable space. Have you ever received any different forms of media which have caught your attention?
I think that's really cool. I do, and often it's from children, but I kind of wish that it wasn't limited to just children, because we all have like our preferred way of communicating, and for a lot of people, an email isn't necessarily like the most accessible, whether it's like writing it or reading the response, or a meeting feels very daunting or isn't very accessible either. But I often get like handwritten letters and drawings from children, and yeah, they're really powerful.
Yeah.
And I do read all of them and respond to them.
Yeah, and it's a nice thing to receive as well. Someone's taken the time and effort to put that together.
Yeah, it's really it's really touching.
Yeah. Oh, and something nice to put up in the office as well.
Yeah, definitely. We all love it. Like we all read them. And we're like, oh, this is amazing. Like, and this is such a good point.
Yeah. How powerful would that be if we collated all of those artworks that MPs receive and make a big mural somewhere in the UK? That would be really cool.
Yeah, that would be so cool.
Cool. So thank you everyone for submitting your questions live. They have started coming through to me now, so thank you very much. So these are questions being asked directly from the people who've joined us today, Nadia. So we've got about 10 minutes or so to answer these questions.
I'll try and be quick so that we get in as many questions as
you.
possible.
So the first one is from Anita, so thanks Anita. What plans do the current government have to ramp up education in sustainability and training in green skills?
Oh, this is a great question, and it's one that I really care about. So as I mentioned before, in the last Parliament I brought the Climate Education Bill, which was asking the government to make sure that schools, colleges, not just in the national curriculum but also vocational courses, are teaching climate through every subject. So not just in optional subjects like science or geography, but learning about, say, like sustainable food production in food tech, about like the history of the climate crisis and colonialism in history, that kind of thing. I'm really pleased that because of all of our campaigning, and particularly the voices of young people, that has become part of Labour's policy platform, and that the Labour government is undertaking a review of the curriculum and climate is part of that. I would like to see us go even further and talk about like retrofitting school buildings and decarbonising education.
And maybe even, you know, how to actually speak to politicians within some form of curriculum. You know, I remember I left school and I didn't know how to get in touch with my MP.
Yeah, so it's not something that ever crossed my mind.
Yeah, and it would be really powerful to learn that type of thing in school as well.
Definitely.
Thank you for your answer there. Some great questions coming in, thank you all. We've got one from Tony. And Tony asks, how can national climate and nature interest groups, so people like RSPB, Just Stop Oil and other named here, be able to have conversations with government ministers?
So I'm obviously not a minister, I'm a backbencher, but I would say write to your local MP to make sure that they are putting pressure on the minister on the issues that you've raised, and also getting a meeting. And I would say as a national group, and it would probably be most impactful actually to do this as a coalition of groups, to write to the relevant ministers and ask to have a meeting. And I think the more groups that you have under that banner, the more difficult it is to say no.
And as part of that, I imagine, you know, building that relationship with your own MP so that they feel compelled to do that and understand your reasons for wanting to do that as well. Because, you know, as an MP asking to set up a meeting with the minister, you need to be confident that that meeting is going to be run well and that what's being said you're potentially, you know, on board with, and that's an important part of that step as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah. Brill, thank you very much. We've got a question from Sam here, who talks about, do large non-disruptive protest have an impact about how MPs think about different issues, especially if they don't get into mainstream media?
100%. I think that protest is so powerful, and that is why the last government tried to curtail our protest rights, is because it's powerful and because it's one of the few ways that people outside of election time get to make their voices heard. I think that, like, if you're having a protest, invite your local MP and say, like, come and march with us, come and address the protest, so that they also feel part of this movement, and that movement can hold them accountable. I think it's unfortunate that often like protests aren't covered in a lot of mainstream media as much as they should be, but it really does make a difference.
Yeah,
it makes us feel the pressure.
That's good to know. And one thing that we work with people to do at Hope for the Future is if they're having, a demo or something like that, that they make, active time to not only invite their MP, but also a space to have a one-on-one or a small group conversation with them. And it's really important to see that, mass movement of people, and it's really powerful to see that many people standing together. And what we've heard from MPs we've worked with is, understanding more of the thinking behind it and having that compelling short conversation away from the media and stuff can be really powerful. Have you ever had any experience in that?
Definitely. I mean, I go to as many protests as possible in Nottingham. I try to never knowingly miss a picket line or a protest, but it's always great to have a kind of closer relationship with the people organising them. And then you can also use them as a sounding board for stuff like this is coming up. What do you think about it?
Yeah.
But I think for perhaps MPs who aren't so used to or aren't so comfortable doing that, it's a good idea, as you suggested, to say that we're doing this. Come and meet a small group of your constituents, either at the protest or beforehand, and then maybe the next time they'll come to, if not a protest, then some event that you're running, and can become increasingly more involved. Yeah,
thank you. That's really helpful. We've got a question from Chris here. He says, how can you, Nadia, support Chris's local MP, who's Ros Savage, to take forward the Climate and Nature Bill? And I know that you're co-sponsoring that bill. Maybe you could talk more about your role in how you will be supporting that bill.
Yeah, so I'm really glad to be co-sponsoring this, and this is another example of where I had lots of messages from constituents about it. Amazing. And I would always want to co-sponsor it, and in the last Parliament I co-sponsored the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. But when I got the message saying, would you like to co-sponsor it, I was particularly enthusiastic, because I was like, oh, this is what loads of people have been emailing me about. I would say if your MP isn't already supporting it, to ask to meet with them about it. And maybe you could take with you a representative from the group so that they can then feed in the work that's happening in Parliament, so that MPs can speak to other MPs who are doing work on it. And it doesn't have to mean taking on a huge amount of work, because you can't possibly front every single campaign or project. But it can just be supporting colleagues to do what they're doing.
And how powerful is it to have, we're expecting the second reading of the bill early next year. How powerful will it be to have more MPs in that room?
Yeah, it will. I think it will be powerful to people outside who can see that this is an issue that their MPs care about, and that they've listened to their constituents who care about it and made the time to be there. And it's not always possible. Sometimes second reading will often be on a Friday when MPs are in their constituencies. So if you don't see your MP there, it doesn't mean that they don't support it. But I think it's really powerful. And I think that also shows the government that MPs care about this and are going to be putting pressure on them. So they should do something.
Exactly, and that's an ask that people can put to their politicians in the next few months is, will you attend that reading of the bill? Brill, thank you. This is a good one. Jessie asks, if I don't have much time, which is an issue that a lot of people have, childcare, caring responsibilities, work, that sort of stuff, what is the one most powerful thing I can do as a constituent to encourage my MP to take action on climate change?
Oh, okay. I would say for someone who is juggling a lot of different things, like work, multiple jobs maybe, childcare, other caring responsibilities, just the busyness of life, I would say write a quick short email to your MP that isn't copy and pasted if possible, and just says, for example, this thing is coming up, it's really important for this reason. I am worried about this because, like, I live near a main road, my child has asthma. Please can you meet with me, attend this? Maybe if you have the information, here is a question you could ask in Parliament.
Yeah.
But if you don't have all of that information, it doesn't matter. Just send what you can. And, you know, like, we also don't have lots of time to read, like, long bits of text. So it doesn't matter if it's short.
Yeah. And that you make such a good point there about, you know, if you can add an ask, like, something that your MP can do as a result of that correspondence, so you're more likely to get a response. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and even if it's a response said, you know, I can't quite do that, but I could do this instead. Is that something that your office is often thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. So sometimes, like, I won't be able to attend a debate because I've got another really important thing that I'm doing, and unfortunately you can't be in multiple places at once. But then we'll say, unfortunately you can't do that, but have done this and we'll do this other thing.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And it sounds like your office is busy and get back to quite, like, as everyone they possibly can. But Henry asks us, what should I do if I contact my MP and I don't hear back? What if I don't get a response?
I think make clear in your email that you would like a response, because MPs have lots of different policies about which emails they respond to. Like, some MPs, if you're sending an email about, like, a policy issue rather than a casework issue, so something related to policy rather than an individual issue that you're having that requires your MP to do something on your behalf, sometimes MPs will read them, note them, but not necessarily respond. So I think say that you would like a response with more information about what they've been doing, what action they will take in future, kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is something I can add a little bit from our experience on as well, because sadly that is one of the most common requests that we get at Hope for the Future is help. I've contacted my MP 40, 50 times and I've had no response, and you can imagine that feels very disempowering, and you've taken the time and effort to write that correspondence, and you know, sometimes all it takes is quickly picking up the phone to the MP's constituency office and saying, you know, I really do care about this issue, please. And they in some cases they might say, I'm really sorry, we've just been dealing with more urgent matters in this instance, and they do get back to you, or they say, you know, why don't you come in for a quick chat and we can talk it through. So that's always lovely if that happens, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And one of the other things we would advise people to do in that instance is think about what other decision makers they might be able to speak to about similar topics. So, for example, speaking with your local councillor, or if you're in a combined authority area, thinking about getting in touch with your mayor's office, whatever it may be. But, you know, directing that energy that you have towards making change into, you know, potentially other avenues. And it might be that one of those other decision makers can set you up a meeting with that MP. You know, it's more indirect route to getting to them because they have better relationships. But yeah, it's really nice to speak to an MP who does reply to lots of this correspondence. So thank you for all you're doing to make that happen.
And I think those are really good points about speaking to your councillors and mayor if you have one, and also going in a bigger group and saying, like, we are a group of your constituents who are part of this campaign and we would like to meet with you.
Yeah, so powerful to be thinking about, you know, getting together as a group of us. And we've probably got time for one more question. And Tristan asks a good one about how to best approach your MP if you disagree with their stance on something, but don't want to damage your relationship with your MP by speaking strongly about the issue you care about.
That's a really good question. I would say probably try to find some common ground on things that you do agree on, and then like even if you suspect that MP might not actually really care about that thing at all. Like, for example, some of the MPs who are part of this anti-net zero group talk about why the cost of living crisis is more important.
Yeah.
And you might think, well, if they think that's more important, why did they vote for things that made people poorer?
Yes.
I think at least like taking it at face value that you both think that the cost of living is important, and then like branching out from there.
Yeah, and finding that common ground area, you know, sometimes it can be as small as like you grew up on the same road or your kids go to the same school, and we find it really helpful to sort of build a bit of a rapport on any topic, not necessarily the issue that's divisive between the two of you. And I can imagine, you know, it's daunting for an MP having different people walk into your office and you're not knowing what they're going to say in all those circumstances, and just having, you know, building that rapport on something quite mundane can also be useful.
I think so. And I think like it's unfortunate that, you know, I think that you should like take what people come to you with, and it doesn't matter if you have different opinions about things or about other things. But yeah, I guess people are human beings, and if there is something good that they've done on something else, then you could say that. Not that you should have to, but like sometimes like people are human beings, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like breaking down those barriers in any relationship, isn't it? And finding rapport with people helps build friendships and etc.
And sometimes I'll do that with MPs from other parties, like we won't agree on a lot of things, but say like, oh, this thing that you did on, I don't know, maternity was really good. And then that's like a point from which we can like develop a bit of a relationship and hopefully work together on these other things maybe.
Yeah, definitely. That common ground area is so important. And we are out of time, but there's one really quick question here, which is quite practical. But Zara asks, is it better to contact your MP via their constituency office or their parliamentary email?
I would say if they have two email addresses, then use the constituency one. But most MPs will just have one email address, and it's our first name second name mp@parliament.uk, and I would send everything to that, and then it usually gets like triaged by the team, and that's much better than contacting on social media because those inboxes often aren't monitored regularly, so things can get missed.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. That was a really engaging discussion. And Nadia, I'm going to ask you sort of one final question, if that's okay. If someone's thinking about speaking with their MP but not quite sure about climate and nature issues, what would you say to them in a sentence or two?
Definitely go and do it. If there are things that you're unsure about, just give it a quick Google. That's all your MP's going to do anyway if they're not sure about it.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Yeah, you've shed a light on a lot of stuff today, the inner workings of Parliament, how it feels being inside an MP's head, especially a new MP as well. And yeah, what a great conversation we've had. So thank you so much, especially for hosting us.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's been brilliant. And on that note, just to follow on from Nadia's final comment there, I'd love to encourage everyone watching today to think about going and speaking with your MP, your Member of Parliament, your Member of the Senate, your MSP, your councillor, whoever it may be. Put pen to paper, pick up the phone and go and speak to them. And as Nadia's reinforced today, it's really valuable. None of us don't know enough. And it's a really important time as well as we you know, approach our commitments on climate change as well. I think Nadia's added a lot of colour and substance to what can feel like, you know, quite a daunting or difficult thing to approach with politicians, but actually our lived experience and our own stories, wherever it may be, you know, struggling to put the bills on, to put the heating on and pay the bills, or, you know, I can't get to work on time because there's not enough public transport routes to get me there. those types of stories and hearing your own perspective is really important. So please don't hesitate. You absolutely aren't on your own. Hope for the Future, our sole resource, our sole mission is to support people like you at home. It's to support people at organisations to understand the political system, how it works, and how to have that conversation with your politician. It might be quite practical support, like putting together an agenda, doing a bit of research for you, helping you understand who your MP is. Nadia talked today about why she got into politics, and it's those types of things which can really help you feel more confident going into your meeting with them, because you understand them a little bit more as a person, and how to find that common ground area, as Nadia talked about today. So we run training online, and we also run training in person, and it's not a scary place to be. It's a really open, friendly training, and what we do is provide you with a step-by-step guide to taking that first step. Or maybe it is that you've got a bit of a relationship with your politician, and maybe it's broken down over a number of years, and helping you to sort of craft your ask for your politician, understanding what they can actually do for you, understanding how to set up a meeting, and understanding what it is that will see progress with that politician as well. So please do check out our website, which is www.hftf.org.uk, and you'll find everything on there that you need to access our training. We have lots of free resources as well, and one of our newest resources is called our Pledge Tracker. Very cool, Nadia. It breaks down every manifesto commitment that was made by all parties in the election period, and highlights progress against all of them on climate and nature issues.
That's a really good idea.
We'll share that with you after today.
Yeah, please.
So please do come along to that training. If you have enjoyed our event today, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's lots more discussions like this, and lots more interesting tips and tricks that you can see on there as well. And they are also on our social media, so please do check out our Instagram and Twitter as well. And just finally, and once again, a huge thank you to you, Nadia.
Thank you so much.
It's been fantastic.
And thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you all for taking the time wherever it is that you may be today, and have a good rest of the day.